All right, Braves fans, let's get rolling. I'm George McNair, and this is State of the Braves. Well, guys, I'm coming to you with a trade deadline special. So we're going to talk all things trade deadline and really focus in on the Braves' primary need, which is outfield. I mean, um, if you've been watching the Braves at all, then you recognize this. I'm not going to make a huge case for the Braves needing an outfielder. Obviously, losing Ronald Acuna for the season, losing Michael Harris for what will end up being 2 months. Hopefully, he'll be back in mid-August now that he's been put on the 60-day injured list. That's retroactive, so mid-August is kind of the timetable there. But all that being said, the Braves are in desperate need for outfield help. If you watch the most recent crushing loss to the Mets, Laureano missing a maybe not routine fly ball, but a fly ball he should have caught, uh, missing it entirely. Braves lose the game in extra innings. I don't want to throw him under the bus. Uh, Alone. It's been a comedy of errors in a lot of different ways for the Braves outfield as they've tried to patch things together um, after losing two of the best outfielders in baseball this season. So, all that being said, the need is obvious. We're going to go into that. We'll talk a little bit more about maybe their other needs, but I want to focus primarily on that need today. Um, I'm also, I've got my sweet little golden retriever here with me today. I usually don't, but my wife's away. And so if you hear a bark occasionally or I have to, deal with her just for a moment, or seem a little more distracted. That's the reason why she doesn't fully understand what I'm doing right now. So, anyways, um, all that being said, we'll see how things go today. It might make the episode a little more fun. We need some fun as Braves fans in our lives right now. We need some positivity. I'll definitely talk about that too. The Braves themselves definitely need to relax a little bit and have a little more fun out there on the diamond. But okay, so the Braves have now dropped 5 games in a row. If you're feeling negative, if you're feeling down, if you're feeling like this team is cursed, you are not alone. It is really hard, and I am a built-in optimist, natural optimist, and man, I think all my optimism has basically run dry as well. So losing 5 games in a row, um, win your first game off of the All-Star break, and then to lose 5 games in a row after that, when you really needed to turn it on and go 5-1, not 1-5, coming out of the All-Star break. It's been really ugly, and it's not just losses, but it's ugly losses. It's games that you should win. It's games where the defense goes away. I mean, all sorts of things have happened to make these games really ugly. The offense has been anemic, and now they only sit a half game up on the Mets and a game and a half or so out of sliding entirely out of the top 3 wild card slots. So most of the season, I think, even though the Phillies have been really great, the messaging has been, well, don't worry, the Braves will get into the playoffs, and all you need to do is get in the playoffs, and they have good pitching, and they'll have a puncher's chance basically. And I think all that is true, except you have to get into the playoffs. And now I think this team is in danger. They're in danger of mentally, emotionally, really cratering. And so this is a really, really crucial week or so, I think, to see how the Braves come out of the trade deadline, how they're able to bounce back after this crushing loss in New York, and some really, really disappointing losses against beatable teams as of late. So to say that this season has been a struggle would be a massive understatement, obviously. But what the team has shown post All-Star break has really been nothing short of alarming. The offense shows no ability to manufacture runs. The guys who you hoped would find new life after the break really have not. The defense, which has actually been one of the few bright spots for the team this year, has now turned bad, has had multiple costly mental and physical errors. You had multiple of those in Cincinnati. You had Duvall not throwing the ball home, allowing an extra run to score. You had Matt Olson with a couple defensive errors, even though they're not errors on the technically, he definitely made some mental errors in that series. Just a lot of different things, and then of course Laureano last night. The injuries, of course, are still piling up. So mix all of that um, with a couple of bad breaks, which they've definitely had, and it's very easy to feel like this team is cursed. So if you're feeling that way, you're not alone. You're not weird. You're not going insane. It does feel that way, and if we're feeling that way as fans, it's very natural for the team to feel that way. Even though they might not be saying it out loud, they might be saying all the right things to the media and that sort of thing. You can imagine they are feeling it. Like, what will be the next bad thing to happen? Who will be the next guy to go down with injury? All that stuff. And so the Laureano error last night, you could actually read it in the moment on some of the guys' faces. It's just like this down. Like, I'm not surprised this new bad thing has happened, and yeah, I mean, that's just how it's been. Now, Jeff Francoeur, if you watched the broadcast last night, number one, I love when Francoeur's in the booth. Definitely brings a different perspective. Really have liked CJ Nitkowski this year, but Francoeur is just kind of a different guy. And of course, I really like having that position player perspective too. But Francoeur went off on the broadcast last night, preaching the need, for the team to fight those bad, defeating thoughts. And while I totally agree with him, I think Francoeur is really on point with most of what he thinks about in terms of, he has his own podcast. He talks a lot about kids and the mentality of playing sports and that sort of thing. So I do agree with him, but you also have to have the guys in place to help make that happen, right? To help turn around the mental negativity. And so I think he was totally right in his messaging last night. But then, Laureano just makes this blunder in the outfield, and it's back to the negative because you can't physically do it, or you're not good enough on the field, and particularly in the outfield. And so honestly, you need to have guys in place who can do that. And for the last month or so, the Braves have had a corner outfield that really has no place in the starting lineup for contending teams. So yes, that's due to injuries, but now's the time to fix it. Here we are at the trade deadline, and now's the time to fix it. So, guys, the Braves have to bring some fresh blood in the outfield, similar to what they did in 2021, right? Not only to bring a difference on the field, but to provide some juice, some much needed juice to this clubhouse. I wish, like Francoeur is calling for, I wish this team could, look inside themselves and turned around on their own. But here we are, July 26th. It hasn't happened yet. I mean, a couple guys have turned it on a little bit more on the field, but just as a group, I mean, last night's loss to the Mets is just the most perfect example of this. It's just things are going bad. There's definitely a negativity to the clubhouse. I mean, I think if any of you guys um, saw the movie The Natural, I mean, it's an older movie. Obviously, Robert Redford, great baseball movie. There's that scene where the guy comes in and they're talking like losing is a disease, and the whole team is just down. And that's what I feel like. I feel like the Braves have caught that disease, and they really haven't struggled with that. Over the last 6 or 7 seasons since they've turned the rebuild into so much success. This is by far, I think, in a lot of ways, even more of a struggle than early 2021 was because the expectations were so high. So, a lot of the struggle has been due to injury. But even before Ronald went down, he was not playing well. Even before Harris went down, he was not playing well. It's like there's been something in the water with this team all season. So they need to figure it out. And I don't have a magic bullet. I don't have the answer. I have a couple of ideas of what needs to do. What needs to happen just from a sports psychology standpoint, which I'll probably share in a minute. But certainly on the field, fresh blood, a couple guys. We did see that work in 2021. Of course, I think Jock Peterson was a huge part of that. But all those guys played well too, right? So Soler came in and hit some bombs, and so did Peterson, and so did Duvall. and so did Eddie. So whoever they do bring in, they do have to perform on the field. That's a big part of it. So one more note before I dive into who I think the best players will be for the Braves to target at the trade deadline. And again, in this episode, I'm really targeting outfielders. But I think this season has probably been the least fun season I've experienced as a Braves fan since the lowest point of their rebuild. So that's probably like 2016. 2017 was the year that Snitker came in and they started to, you could start seeing a light at the end of the tunnel with the rebuild in 2017. And then 2018 was maybe a surprise season, but obviously really fun. The first season they came back and won the NL East. So 2016, I mean, we're talking close to a decade of great baseball, fun baseball from the Braves. And of course, we're still here right in the middle of a playoff hunt. But it's been a tough year, right? Not sure many of you feel the same way. So I'm willing to bet the same feeling is shared by the players. This has not been a fun year. And of course, you juxtapose that to 2023, which was a totally fun year. Everything seemed to go right, at least in the regular season for the Braves. So it may sound simple, but I think they need to find a way to just start having fun again. I'm sure they're putting a ton of pressure on themselves. Losing isn't fun. So obviously, it's a lot easier to have fun when you're winning. Um, but this season has been full of injury. They've lost their buddies. They've lost, key guys. Um, and it's been a struggle. On top of that, not meeting expectations, looking back on it, I think it was a pretty big mistake, though natural. They all came into spring training talking about World Series or bust. And of course, you look back at that now and you're like, oh gosh, just maybe just get to the playoffs. But they put so many high expectations on themselves. Of course, you look back at how they finished 2023. It was so disappointing. But I really think that's a piece of this. Those really high expectations, the early injury to Strider, everything kind of going wrong from the beginning, guys struggling. And I think they have to find a way to put all of that behind them. I was hoping that was going to happen naturally with the All-Star break. It obviously didn't. So turn turn the page with maybe the trade deadline. Um, but they have to find a way mentally, emotionally to put that stuff behind them and just get back to the simple joy of the game, right? Just love coming out and playing the game and don't worry about the results. That's hard to do. It's easier said than done. But just enjoy being on the field, playing together. I recently watched The Sandlot. I do that every now and then. Love that movie. It's just such a joy. I was about that age when that movie came out, and that movie is about several things, but one of the things it's about is just the joy of baseball, right? Being with your buddies and maybe get back to the simple thing of just playing baseball together. I hope they can do that. And I think the more they enjoy just being on the field and having fun, maybe the wins will follow. Seems super simple, and it actually might be really a lot harder to do that than it sounds, but I really do think that could bring them some success. I certainly think it will make them at least a little more fun and enjoyable to watch. I probably don't need to convince you guys as we get back to focusing on the field stuff. I probably don't need to convince you guys that the Braves need serious help in the outfield. But if you do need a little bit of evidence, all you have to do is take a cursory look at Fangraphs. If you go to the Fangraphs website, it's obviously just one place you can go for this. But the Braves right now are tied at the bottom of the league in Fangraphs WAR for both left fielders and right fielders combined. Now, left field, you had some good play from Jared Kelenic early in the season, and then of course he's moved over to center. So I think all that positive is him. I think it's mostly negative otherwise this season in terms of right field. Again, barely above zero. As well. So it's just been a real struggle for the Braves. Obviously, ever since Acuna went down, but even Acuna, right? He wasn't providing a ton before he went down too. So yeah, it's been a struggle, and it's the obvious need for the Braves. Now they do, I think, probably need a starting pitcher as well, and there's been talk about the Braves targeting that as well. I'm not gonna spend as much time on the starting pitching as I am going to in the outfield today. So let's turn our attention to the outfield. So in my mind, I just want to kind of get on the same page. This is how I'm determining who the best targets are for the Braves to go out and get. So in my mind, the best fit for the Braves outfield need will have these qualities. All right. Number one, I think it should be a pure rental, like they went out and got Jock Peterson in 2021, a pure rental bat um, on the final year of the contract, on the final year of his contract. That's pretty much what that means. Um, and that's obviously due to the fact that they have Acuna coming back. Harris will obviously be back this year, and then Kelenic, and all those guys are signed for many years to come. So there's just no space in on the roster for a full-time starter type. But that's what you need for 2024. You need a legitimate impact uh, outfielder, big bat. So that's number one, a pure rental piece. Number two, a guy who can hit righties. I talked about this in an earlier episode. The Braves have been really bad against right-handed pitchers this year. I think sometimes that shows up with even a right-hander that doesn't have great numbers on the year. Suddenly he'll walk in and he'll dominate the Braves, and you're like, how did they only get 3 or 4 hits against that guy? It's just because they don't hit righties well. There's only a couple guys in the lineup who are hitting righties at a fairly high level. Number three, a guy who has a high hit and on base tool. Having a guy who has power is a bonus, but there's very few guys on this team that get on base at a regular clip and who just get some hits, right? Just get on base and get some hits and make things happen. This team last year, it all worked so well. It was built all on power, and they were all, of course, hitting for power and hitting consistently. And the offense flourished. But of course, this year they're not hitting for as much power. It all just kind of craters when you're solely, you're just relying on that power to show up. Nobody's getting on base. So when you do get a home run, it's a solo home run. It's just way less impact that way too. So I would focus on a guy, especially with a high on base. And okay, power is nice, but it's kind of a secondary want, not necessarily a need. Number four, a guy who doesn't strike out a ton, and kind of connected to that has some situational hitting ability. So again, putting the bat on the ball, doesn't strike out a ton. The Braves strike out a lot, and reducing that just a little bit is good. By the way, some of these things I think Nacho Alvarez brings to the table. He hasn't been great in his first 3 games, but it's his first 3 games. Okay, so I think um, he has a really high hit tool and on base tool as well. So I think that's great, a great element to add to the team. By the way, I haven't really talked. I mean, I'm going off on a tangent here just for a second, if you'll let me. I haven't talked about Nacho being added and Ozzy's injury much at all. This is going to be very obvious. Losing Ozzy Albies really hurts. Losing Ozzy Albies for 8 weeks is just another like downer of a thing to have to endure. I do think the silver lining to this is you get 8 weeks of seeing Nacho Alvarez play. Is he, a player for the future or not? Could he slide over to shortstop eventually? Um, and we're going to get plenty of good looks at Nacho Alvarez over these next 2 months. And adding someone, let's be honest, Ozzy was not lighting the world on fire. So maybe he would have turned it around in these last 2 months, and you would have gotten a big high impact version of Ozzy Albies, but that's not how he was playing. So you kind of feel like in some ways you didn't lose the all-star Ozzy Albies. He just hasn't been that this year. So you have a chance to get a totally different player in Nacho Alvarez if he plays at his peak. Um, Ozzy is a power first guy, low on base. Nacho is high on base, and he was showing power at AAA too. So anyways, my silver lining is okay. We get a really good look at Nacho, and maybe he does get hot and he starts providing some big things for the Braves. All right. So, anyways, back to my focus on what I want in the outfield. Since I took a break from that, let me go back. A pure rental piece, number one. A guy who can hit righties, number two. A guy who has a high hit and on base tool. Uh, Over power, though power would be nice too. Number four, a guy who doesn't strike out a ton because the Braves strike out a lot. Okay, now number five, a guy who can play passable right field. It'd be great to get a Gold Glove quality right fielder, but we need somebody in the lineup who can impact the game offensively. Okay, so we're looking really for an offensive first guy who can at least play in right field. And I'm saying right field because, I'm envisioning, okay, it'd be great if when Harris comes back, you slide Kelnick back over to left. He was playing basically a Gold Glove left field before he had to move over. It'd be nice to be able to do that for both those guys and just have a right fielder from there. All right, and then finally, my number six, a guy who can maybe steal some bases. This is the Braves losing Harrison, especially losing Acuna, basically steal no bases. It would be awesome to find a guy. He doesn't have to be a burner, but somebody who can steal a base occasionally for you. So before I get to my list of the top guys, I would like to see the Braves target. Let me eliminate one guy from the list that I think is unrealistic, and that's Luis Robert from the White Sox. He's probably the biggest name on the trade market in terms of outfielders. We could dream on this guy, but he will come number one with a huge price tag. He has multiple years of control remaining. When he's healthy, that is another issue with him. He hasn't been incredibly healthy for his career. But when he's healthy, he's kind of a superstar level player, can play a good center field, has power, all those things. But yeah, he's not a rental, and he's going to be really expensive. I think the Braves may be willing to target a guy who isn't a pure rental, but only if the cost isn't prohibitive. And with Luis Robert, it would be prohibitive. Let's be realistic. The Braves are not going to empty their farm system for a short-term need when there are other options on the table. And let's also remember that the Braves don't have a great farm system to pull from anyways. And I just don't think it's realistic. Another thing to keep in mind is this morning, Randy Arozarena was moved, so his name's off the list. He was moved to the Mariners for two prospects. This is interesting to me just because we can kind of gauge where the market is. So neither of the two prospects the Mariners sent to Tampa Bay were top 100 guys in their farm system, but they were really solid. The Mariners have one of the best farm systems in the big leagues, and they were probably like in the middle, 14, 15 on their list. They would probably be top 5 to top 10 guys in the Braves organization. So if you're going to get someone, there is one target that I think is kind of similar to Randy Rosarena. I'll mention that as I get to it. So you might have to think if we're going to get that guy, then maybe two top 5 to top 10 guys in our system to get him. Obviously, you always have to give up things to get things. So it's obviously worth thinking about. All right, so as we get to my list, I'm also going to leave out a few names of guys you may see on the likely to be traded lists out there. If I leave somebody off the list, it's just because I don't like them. I don't think they're a high enough impact player to warrant much attention. So I'm trying to think of guys who are really good fits, impact, especially on the offensive side of things. All right, so I'm going to go in reverse order. I'm going to give you 8 guys, and I'll obviously finish with my top choice. So number 8 on my list is Michael Conforto of the San Francisco Giants. The Giants have put out that they are probably going to be selling, and Conforto is on that list of guys that they are looking to move. At least that's what the reports say. Braves fans will know Conforto mostly from his time as a Met. He's had some good seasons. When he came up, he looked like a potential star. So he hasn't been quite that, but he has some talent. Um, he's had some good moments, but he's also had to overcome some injury in the past and has definitely had uneven performances. Okay, so he's a lefty. He's a true right fielder with some power, but the negative on him is he carries a low batting average and a low on base percentage. and actually has reverse splits. So even though he's a lefty, he doesn't provide you a ton of help against righties, which is, again, is something the Braves need. For the year, he's hitting 226 with 10 home runs and a 298 on base percentage. So these are not great numbers. He probably is a mild upgrade from what they currently have, and you could probably get him for very little in terms of prospect capital because he's making $18 million a year. Again, he is a true rental, but that's a lot of money to take on. Obviously, you're only taking on a portion of that here at the back end of the year. That's why he's really low on my list. Very slight upgrade. You don't have to give up much for him, but what's the impact there? Number 7 for me is Ryan Mountcastle. So he's with the Orioles. So this one's a little weird, but there have been reports that the Orioles might try to move. That the Orioles have so many good position players. They kind of have they have too many, honestly, for the space. So they might try to move a couple guys for pitching. So I don't know if they could line up with the Braves because the Braves are also looking for pitching too. But Mountcastle is a good bat. He's a first baseman first, but he has played some outfield in his career, but not since 2021. So I don't think he would be a right fielder for the Braves. They'd probably have to move him to left and just hope he could survive out there. But again, good bat. He's hitting 271, lower on base, 310 on base percentage, 12 home runs. He mashes lefties, okay, but he isn't bad against righties. He'd still probably be one of the better hitters in the Braves lineup against righties this year. He is not a rental, so he'd probably also be somewhat expensive. He's arbitration eligible through 2026. So I'm not sure how good of a fit that is, but he is a good bat. All right, number 6, Lane Thomas. Braves fans are certainly familiar with Lane Thomas. He's been with the Nationals for most of his career, so we've seen him plenty. His name has also been one of the loudest floated to the Braves and actually the Phillies as well, that both teams may have interest in Lane Thomas. To me, he's slightly above average offensive player. He's slightly below average defensively. So put those two things together, he's an average player. He did have a career year last year with 28 home runs, so he kind of flashed more than he has in the past. This year, he's been a little injured and a little down from that production as well. But he's a serviceable right fielder. He would be an upgrade for the Braves. This year, he's hitting 247 with a 320 on base percentage and 8 home runs. But again, that's certainly down from 28 home runs and 86 RBIs last year, which was a career year for him. It seems like last year might have been an outlier. I think he's probably more of a 15 to 20 home run guy. So that's not bad, but it's not setting the world on fire either. The other issue I have with Lane Thomas and why he's a little lower on my list is he has reverse splits from what you want. He mashes lefties. He's hitting lefties to a tune of 329 this year, but only hitting righties at a 211 clip. So again, against righties, he's just not providing that punch that would be really nice to have. He does provide a speed element on the bases. He already has 26 steals this year, which is a career high for him. So to me, that is a positive to him, something that the Braves really could use. He's under contract through next season, so he's not a pure rental, which just means, again, the price is going to be a little higher. And what do you do with Lane Thomas after this year? He's probably too good to be a fourth outfielder. I mean, you could keep him through spring training as, insurance. If Ronald isn't quite ready, then you could trade him away. But, it's something that certainly they'd have to consider. All right, my number 5 guy is Lamont Wade Jr. Wade is also with the Giants. He is an interesting target because he's played mostly first base for the Giants this year, but he has played a decent amount of outfield in the past, which actually is an interesting piece. The Braves don't really have a true backup first baseman if Olsen were to go down, except you'd have to move Riley maybe over to first. So this would give you a little bit more flexibility there. His hitting profile is also kind of weird. In 2021 and 2023, he flashed more power. He had like 17 and 18 home runs in those years with a lower batting average. kind of in like the 250s range. But this year he has only 3 home runs, but he's hitting 298 with a 423 on base percentage. So I'm not sure what's happening if he just totally changed his approach, sacrifices power for on base. But again, I mean, that's kind of what I'm looking for. High on base guy, high average guy. And he does have power, right? He's hit 17, 18 home runs in his career. And as you guys know, San Francisco is a really hard place to hit home runs. So maybe if you move him to Atlanta, with the chop house there, maybe he can punch some into the chop house. So he does hit righties well. He's a left-handed hitter. Gives you a better situational hitter who, again, can get on base. He is also under contract through 2025. So again, not a pure rental piece, kind of similar to the Lane Thomas situation. All right, my number 4 guy is Mike Yastrzemski, again with the Giants. So we got 3 Giants on the list here. So I wonder if the Braves might be shopping in that aisle. We all know the name Yastrzemski, certainly, right? He is the grandson of Hall of Famer Carl Yastrzemski, which I kind of wish Carl Yastrzemski was available for trade, but Mike is. So I've always actually liked Mike Yastrzemski. I think he's always been a solid big leaguer. He's an above average offensive player. He really has been through his entire career. And he's an average defender by the metrics. Now, with the metrics, I do wonder that the Giants have played him all over the outfield, including center field. And I wonder if his metrics would just be better if he'd just be, right fielder at Truist Park. I do think he would be just fine. In fact, he might be one of the better defensive outfielders on my list. This year he's hitting 244. He's always been a little bit lower on the average side, but he's got good power. 8 home runs, but that's only in 59 games. He's had a little bit of an injury history, so that is something to keep in mind too. And as you guys might know, the Giants are very aggressive with their platooning. So that's pretty much all against right-handed hitting, right-handed pitchers. So I think Yastrzemski actually could play every day with the Braves, or he could platoon and be a much better platoon option with Duvall than Rosario has been. He's signed through 2025 as well. So again, he could serve kind of the Lane Thomas situation. Maybe he could serve as your 4th outfielder or insurance for your outfield if there's an injury going into 2025. All right, let's get to my top 3, and these guys are there's definitely a separation for me between the top 3 and the rest, even though I do kind of like Yastrzemski. But my number 3 is Jazz Chisholm Jr. So again, Braves fans are going to be very familiar with Jazz as well, since he's played his entire career with the Marlins. Very talented player, but has never really shown consistent production. This season, he's hitting 248 with a 320 on base percentage and 13 home runs. That's not bad. He's maybe just at or just above league average with those numbers. So maybe you acquire him thinking that you can change his approach a little bit at the plate and tap more into that raw talent that he certainly has. He's actually said, he's from the Bahamas originally. He's actually said that he grew up a Braves fan. He would love to play for the Braves one day. That's kind of interesting to me. It doesn't make that much of a difference, except that he would love to come play for you. And maybe you'd get a little bit more out of him because he would be in a place that he'd really like to be. I actually think it probably is difficult to be any kind of consistent hitter in that Marlins lineup. It's just a weird place to play. They haven't had consistent success. They haven't had consistent offense. So who knows? Maybe coming to the Braves would energize him as well. He's hyper athletic. He came up as a second baseman, and they converted him to a center fielder. I wonder if putting him in right field, what that would look like. He actually has fairly even splits between lefties and righties. So if you're getting Jazz Chisholm, he is not a platoon. He's an everyday player. And he's also signed through 2026. So I'm not sure how the Braves would work that. Would you just worry about 2024 and then maybe trade him in the offseason? Or, would you reassess, is he better than Kelman? I don't know what you would do with that. But nonetheless, he's an obvious upgrade from what you have, much bigger upgrade than these other guys on the list. And he gives you a stolen base threat as well. He's stolen 21 bases so far this season. All right, my number 2 guy, if you told me a year ago that this guy would be high on my list for the Braves to get, I would be like, "Really?" My number 2, Jesse Winker. So Winker also with the Nationals, he signed a minor league deal with them in the offseason. He had basically 2 really bad down years. One of those was derailed by injury, and maybe the other one was kind of, just coming back from the injury. But he did not play well with the Mariners, or I think it was the Brewers. He's hitting 256 this year, with a 374 on base percentage. That really pops off the screen because that's one of the best on base percentages in all of baseball this year. And 11 home runs. So he has power. 2, left-handed hitter. He's been especially great against righties. He has the 8th highest on base percentage against righties in baseball. So that, I mean, if you're top 10 in any category in baseball, I mean, I'm looking at that. And if you're available, awesome. So Winker does bring that. I think if you got him, you could put him in the 2 hole, and now you're finally getting some consistent, you know, you're getting somebody on base consistently for Ozuna and Riley, which just has not been the case for the Braves pretty much all year. Winker was, by the way, he was an All-Star in Cincinnati in 2021. So this season for him is not a total off the wall shock. Um, so, I mean, I think he is a good player who is healthier and producing in actually a pretty bad lineup. So maybe, I mean, the Braves lineup's been bad too, but with more talent at least around him. Uh, he's not a great defensive player. He's mostly played left field in his career. So I don't know if the Braves would be willing to put him in right. He has played a little bit in right field, but not much. But he'd be a supreme platoon option with Duvall. I think if you just platooned Winker with Duvall, you continue to give him, Duvall's been fine against lefties, okay? Um, I think that is, if you're talking about maximizing production with your right field, I think that would be the way to do it. I can't imagine Jesse Winker is going to be very expensive. He is a true rental piece, and he's not expensive monetarily either, right? He's on that minor league contract. So for what the Braves probably want to do, and it would probably leave the door open to do other deals. And I think that's the other big thing. If you go big on right field, maybe you can't get a pitcher, or maybe you'd want to get 2 hitters, or 2 outfielders. I don't know what they will end up doing. But Winker, I think, doesn't rock the boat too much in terms of what you got to give up. And I think that's another reason why high impact offensively against righties. A lot of these weaknesses the Braves have, he has strengths in those areas. So I like him a lot. All right, but he's not my number 1. My number 1 is Brent Rooker. So Brent Rooker is a late bloomer. He's, I think, about to turn 30 years old. The A's acquired him off of waivers 2 years ago, and he's pretty much mashed for a year and a half since that point. This year is his true breakout campaign. He's basically been a top 10 slugger in all of baseball. Right now, he's hitting 289 with a 366 on base percentage and 24 home runs. Basically, think of adding Marcell Ozuna 2.0 to the lineup. Right-handed hitter with massive power. The one negative, actually, there's maybe 2 negatives on Rooker. He's really primarily a DH. He can play left field. That's if he's been in the field, that's where he's been, but he's primarily served as Oakland's DH. And he does strike out a fair amount. So there's probably some space for him to potentially struggle, putting the bat on the ball, which again is something the Braves already struggle with. But his average and on base percentage is where you would want it to be. The other negative is you're definitely buying high on a guy that has really never played to this level before in his career. But, maybe you can ride his hot bat into the playoffs, and he'll continue it for you. So, even though he bats right, he actually hits righties really well. So he also provides that benefit that the Braves desperately need. He's not a rental piece, though. So he's signed through 2027 because he's a late bloomer. He's cheap. He'll be cheap for probably all the way through uh, where he's eligible for arbitration. but that means he's probably going to be expensive to go out and get. Of course, the Braves have traded with Oakland multiple times before. I don't know if that helps or hurts. The A's might decide we don't want to do this anymore, dealing with Anthopoulos. I don't know how that's going to work. Um, so, the reason I like Rooker the best is I think he's the most impactful bat on the market that you could go out and reasonably get. You're gonna have to pay up for him a little bit more. Oh, by the way, I'd mentioned which of these players was similar to Arozarena in terms of price. I think that's Jazz Chisholm in terms of, maybe two top 5 to top 10 prospects for the Braves. I would expect Winker to be cheaper than that, maybe one of those guys. I would expect Rooker to maybe be a little more expensive than Chisholm, but it's hard to know entirely, obviously. So, look, this episode, I've focused on the outfield. It's the most obvious need. Again, just last night's game against the Mets kind of highlighted it. Though I think Anthopoulos is probably also going to target a starting pitcher as well. There have already been some rumors that the Braves are interested in Zach Eflin, that he might be a target for the Braves. He signed through 2025, so he would provide some needed depth that the Braves could use for starting pitching next year with Strider coming back. Again, uncertain about Morton and Fried. He is making $18 million, though, for an effective starter. That basically replaces what Morton would make next year. So, it kind of makes sense in that regard. He's got about a 4 ERA. He was better last year, but he's a solid pitcher. Other starters that are available on the market, I'll just mention them: Jack Flaherty and Garrett Crochet. I don't think the Braves are going to be in that market. They're going to be very expensive. Eric Fetty with the White Sox, Tyler Anderson with the Angels, Cal Quantrill with the Rockies. That probably is more likely if the Braves aren't unable to get Eflin. So anyways, guys, there is little doubt that the Braves need some serious help. But whoever comes in cannot be the savior of the team. That's too much pressure to put on one guy. But if they can breathe some life into this team and everyone can relax a little bit and just start having a little bit more fun, the way the Braves did last year, I think there's certainly a potential for them to turn things around and make their way back into the playoffs and maybe be set up for another run. If not, if they can't turn this negative cloud they have over the team, if they can't turn that around, then this team could crater and miss the playoffs entirely, and honestly be considered one of the biggest disappointments in Braves history. Obviously, I'm not looking forward to that potential. And I do think I am still a big believer in these guys on this team. It's been such a hard season with so many things to try to overcome, but they can do it. And the next 5 to 10 days, I think, will really, I don't know if make or break is true, but it's close to it, right? They need a good trade deadline. Anthopoulos needs to make some additions, and they got to start turning this thing around. So hopefully they will do that. I'll certainly be watching to see if they will. Guys, I really appreciate you tuning in to Stay the Braves. I'll talk to you soon.